Hello and welcome, guys. This is a really interesting live stream that we've put together. I'm Bruce Van Zale. I'm the owner, co-founder of Inovo Studios. And recently we have gone through a process of rebranding our whole company. We've never done branding in the history of the last 10 years of our company. Finally decided to invest and put together a brand that actually represents who we are, what we believe, and where we want to go for the next 10 years. And so I was able to connect with one of my friends and one of my favorite designers, Russell Shaw, who has graciously offered to jump on this call. And we're going to do a whole kind of behind the scenes of how the brand came to be and just kind of walk through the whole process. You guys can see what happened in the span of 5 or 6 weeks in kind of the span of about 30 minutes. So it's going to be kind of a time lapse of the whole process. So thanks, Russell, for jumping on.
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to do this. This is fun.
Awesome. Well, cool. So we're going to share our screen and kind of jump into it. Maybe before we do that, Russell, if you just want to tell us just a little bit about like your history, kind of how you got to do what you're doing today, and kind of what your whole vision for design is.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. I've been a designer for about 10 years, and that's kind of been off and on, in and out of doing things with different agencies or doing things in-house. Majority of the time has been doing things as an independent contractor, as a freelancer. And I think that's definitely my sweet spot. I like getting to work kind of directly with founders, with people that lead marketing at kind of small, medium-sized organizations, especially people that are figuring out and getting their footing on like, hey, we're ready to really go live with this kind of new brand. We want to put something out there either from scratch, or we had something kind of to start with, and now we're ready to like invest in it and really present kind of a face of everything. And so that in the very beginning was doing things that might just be kind of like, hey, we need a new website, or hey, we need some new marketing collateral. I think over time I realized like I just love looking at it like 30,000 foot view of like, let's look at everything and all of it interconnected at the same time and launch kind of from the get-go.
Yeah, and that's been super helpful from a client standpoint, like how I always felt like we were just like handing the most random bits of information back to you, and you were kind of like, okay, here's how we're going to pull this together and make it actually make sense. So
untangling is my favorite part of the
That's awesome. I love it. Well, cool. Well, we can jump into kind of the first process. If you want to kind of talk through this step, like you sent us this questionnaire, and I'll kind of pull it up here while we're talking.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've kind of at this point got a pretty set process that I like to walk through with people. And we walk through it here. We've walked through it on other projects together over time. But, you know, it starts with a questionnaire, a series of questions that I've developed that like this is kind of, for me, how I really get to know like where is the brand today, and where does it need to be? And what are some of the like problems that you're having with what you might currently have? Or where do you feel like the gap between where you are and where you want to be? Like, what are those pain points, and what's like the thing that's missing to get there? And so these questions kind of just walk through trying to do a little bit of digging and discovery on that. And I think it's a good thing for people to walk through with their team, because I think on the one hand, like this gives me a ton of input to take and design with, but on the other hand, it forces teams to start having some serious questions and wrestling on like who we are.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have something that we give to clients because we do a lot of web development and app development. So we have our own questionnaire, but the whole goal is to get clients to think about the process very deeply, and probably more deeply than they've ever thought about it before. And that happened to us. It was kind of interesting to be on the client side. Like we actually have to sit down, turn off all the distractions, and think and like kick some ideas back and forth inside of our team. Like, okay, who are the people we're trying to reach? And this has nothing to do with colors or fonts or anything visual yet. It was just like conceptually, like who are we going after? Which I wish we could say we had all this kind of figured out when we started the process, but I was going to say this process was super helpful, even if we just took this document back with us and kind of use that as how we shaped kind of the rest of the company.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think to your point too, it's not just about colors and all that. I mean, there is a question at the end that's like, what colors do you prefer? Like that is a part of it. But a lot of it is like, who do you see yourself as a company? And while you might throw out a lot of keywords that to you and your team like just feels like this is what we want to be like, that translates to me very visually. Like I think there's a lot to say about like we see ourselves as this like heritage company versus this kind of like contemporary upstart. Those evoke very different visuals to me, and so I think there's a lot to unpack from things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And just some context. So like when the way we had kind of thought about this, like I said, we never did anything with branding. So we had never like I didn't say anything. We spent maybe a few hours, one morning and just put together like, okay, here's what the logo is going to be. When people ask for a logo, this is what it's going to be. We have to have something to put on a business card. So you pick a color or two, we stick it, and we're kind of like, well, we'll just come back to this at some point, which is kind of where like I think most companies, especially startups, like you're like, okay, we'll come back to this at some point. Maybe you pulled some like a friend to design something, or you went on 99 Designs or something, and then you kind of just do something quick, get started, and you're like, we'll come back to this. And then next thing you look up, it's been 10 years. So
yeah.
You're like, okay, I think we should come back to this for real.
Yeah. And I think there's nothing wrong with starting there. Like, especially like if you're not putting it on some sign outside of a building, like it's a very low investment if you're just like getting something out there, as long as you do come back to it someday.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. And we had like, again, a very simple brand when we did we kind of renamed the company a year ago. So we just put something up online and just really didn't spend a lot of time on it. So this was very helpful to kind of go through that. But so we filled this out. You sent this to us. We probably spent about a week, I think, kind of kicking it around our team. We sent it back to you, and then you sent back a mood board, right? I think that was the next step.
Yeah, absolutely. So, these are for people that aren't familiar with like working on these with different projects or things like that. This is kind of pulling in like, all right, here's what I've heard from you. And for me, it's like, now here's several different potential directions that I could see us taking this brand based on what you said. And it's pulling in inspiration on anything like color, imagery, typography, just like conceptual kind of like the look and feel or the vibe or the idea that we're trying to get at. And it kind of says, here's what I'm thinking. Here's stuff that I've gathered that articulates that pretty well. And now let's like talk about it. It's not a blank canvas anymore. But at the same time, I haven't invested like an insane amount of time building something that you kind of don't see. Like I don't want the process to feel like a black box where it's just like we said something and then we got this at the end and we had no idea that was coming. Hopefully the mood boards spell out pretty well, like this is what you can expect unless you give feedback that says otherwise. So
that's awesome. Yeah. And it's the same, like, I think we actually talked about this on another episode of what, with our team, talking about how we shape up work. It's the whole concept that Basecamp has come up with. And this is, to me, is like, you're kind of, I think you use this analogy as well. Like you kind of create like these bookends, like, okay, it could start somewhere over here and it could end somewhere over there. It's not saying this is the logo. It's saying, I think it's going to be somewhere in this kind of zone, I think is kind of how you put it together. But
yeah,
so jump into that. So this was the first one, I think, this one direction.
Yeah, absolutely. So this one, thinking through a lot of the inputs and the things that you guys said, to me, stuff that really resonated, thinking about like how to portray Inovo as a company, was this idea of kind of momentum, that things are like building together and stacking together. You guys are builders by heart. And so I think thinking about like putting together systems of things, everything just kind of clicking into place and making sense and finding order really resonated to me. And so I thought about the idea of this kind of like geometric series of blocks and shapes coming together and just making these perfect arrangements. A lot of that being like cool 3D imagery or simple patterns, but yeah, just all of it showing like building up and kind of momentum was the idea here.
Definitely. It was pretty cool. We definitely, like, the things that I was drawn to is like seeing this. I loved the kind of this sort of isotope, like sort of isometric sort of design that was very architectural in kind of space. And I didn't know that it was because it was architectural. It was just something that I was drawn to. And then this is one of those things that kind of came up later in the design. And I think Russell used the analogy of architect or architecture. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. And then I was like, actually, I was going to be an architect. Like when I was in high school, I was like, I think I'm going to go study architecture. Just never ever, it just became like more of a hobby and an interest. And so like even those things that as kind of the owner, found a business, it kind of comes down to some personal preferences. Like I'm building it the way that I'm kind of wired, the company, but even that little detail was like pulled out, which I thought was really cool. So definitely was really interesting. And then I think this was the other one that you had. Yeah, this growth was a blueprint.
Yeah, this one, blueprint was definitely a key word here. And I was again thinking about you guys as builders, and kind of what goes along with that, and along the architectural idea as well, of seeing through like how did the builder plan what they were planning to build, and getting this sense of like what's the underlying design, what's the kind of behind the scenes. And so this idea of kind of in the top right corner, like editor's notes was kind of a big piece of that. But also next to it, that kind of like exploded letter, I was thinking like these very cool schematic views of things that just show like this really intentional and kind of deeper understanding of subject matter of like how things are put together. I was like, I think there's something to the idea of like, someone's drawing all over the page and saying like, did you think about this? Have you looked over here? And also like getting a sense of like the blueprint of how something was built. If those kind of ideas could come together in a cool way, it would position you guys kind of as like digital architects in a way. It was kind of the thing I was playing with.
It's very cool. No, I loved it. And again, we were, looking at two very different looks. Like the first one was very sort of modern, had a lot of shapes, a lot of hard lines. This was all like pencil drawings and kind of sketches and soft lines. And so we picked a few things from here. I know our team like really liked this. I think we liked some of the hand-drawn stuff here. We liked this sort of color and the serif font that was used here. And then we also liked some of this like very clean stuff. So in my mind, it was two very, very different designs, or even totally different directions. And so, but I think the goal of this was just to kind of see, like start to build a design language between us as the client, you as the designer, you kind of putting like, hey, I think this is kind of what I'm thinking. We come back and say, okay, I think we like these things. It was very, and I think all of this stuff, you just pulled samples from things. I don't think any of this you created right from scratch, or I can't remember.
I think
maybe this down here. I think these. I remember you saying you may have done some of this.
I think those were inspiration. I think on the second page, on the second direction, that one next to the skip the line, I think I put that one together. Yeah, that one was designed. And that one to me kind of said like, here's kind of what I'm seeing as like where all of this could land. The like drawings around the letters and things like that.
That's cool. Yeah. So we took this, I think on that call, we just called out a few things that we liked, and you can see it was very nicely labeled. Each one has a letter and a name. So I made it really quick to kind of put our favorites together. And then you went off, I think for, what was it, about a week or two? This was kind of the longest chunk of time, I think. And went and built kind of the first revision of the concepts, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think usually it's kind of like once I hear back and we talk through the questionnaire, it was 3 days maybe to the mood board. And then we talked through that, got feedback on like what you like, what you don't like. And then it's usually about 2 weeks to actually kind of build everything out from there.
Yeah. And this is, as you can see, this is not like just us throwing a logo together, putting some fonts and colors and some shapes together. Like, the level of intentionality, I love how Russell kind of approaches this, kind of said like a 30,000 foot view. We started with all these big questions about who the brand is, what we want to be, kind of where we want to go. And we're starting very, very wide, and we're going to slowly like narrow in. So there's a lot of intentionality. I don't think people realize, unless you've gone through that process, you don't realize how much detail it is. Like you just see a cool logo come out the other end. You're like, there's a lot, there's, 6-7 weeks of work that's gone into that with many hours of discussion and thought. So cool.
Definitely.
So this was the first thing we saw. I think this was the review one. So let me jump through. There's 107 slides in this one deck that Russell sent. Just want to point that out because worked with a lot of designers, and I don't think anyone has ever put this much work into something so early, just so that we could kind of see two very different directions for this. So this was just more going into your kind of process and what to think. So I don't know how much of this you want to talk to. I'll just kind of skip through it quick.
Let's skip through this and maybe just go to this next one. So this kind of like building futures idea. This was kind of the first idea. And this takes a lot of what was seen in the first mood board, like that'll correlate pretty directly, but taking into account some of the feedback that you guys gave.
Yeah.
So the first one was definitely like, all right, let's figure out the icon first. I think one of the biggest, most important pieces of this is like, the logo in and of itself is not like the most important piece. It's the biggest piece. It's the one that is the most forward facing. But you have to think about it in context of how it sits with everything else. And so like, yes, we want to figure out the logo first, but then I always tell people like, hang on until you see everything too.
Yeah.
So for figuring out the logo, a lot of this was the idea of like, can we show something that has a little bit of a push and pull? Because I really landed on the idea talking with you guys about transformation. That what you guys do isn't just momentum. It's not just building, but you're transforming an organization as far as like the impact that they will have on their sales, on their growth. And so showing growth and transformation, I think, was a big piece of that. And so this kind of like push and pull of two different arrows was some of what I was playing with there. And then kind of as I went down, I was like, how can we abstract those arrows and make this feel a little bit more unique? And then that kind of landed on this mark of these kind of like, you know, a little bit finer lined, a little bit more elevated looking than just like a big chunky 2-arrow system. It felt more professional to me to have this little bit more like wispy line length and these kind of hairpin structures. And so that's where we landed here. And then putting it, going a little further down, putting it in color. So there's kind of several different things that was embedded inside of this. The idea of scale, that one is bigger than the other, just kind of flipping it. And then also, if you go a little further, transform, that kind of the push and pull is pulling out. And so that showcases the idea of growth. Innovating, the one that's moving to the right is obviously kind of the larger one. And so it's this idea of moving forward. And then kind of the last, which I thought was just a little bit of a playful nod to you guys as developers, is the code brackets as well. Just something that if people see it, they see it as kind of a cool nod to that.
Yeah. And then I think we went into some type options, and I'll kind of skip through this, kind of showing, you know, the logo with the type. Icon. Cool. Let's see. So
yeah, and so like I said, you know, a lot of this is it's not just the logo; it's how the logo kind of fits into an ecosystem of other things. And so I was thinking through, like, art direction-wise, you can tile the logo, and it creates this cool pattern that to me was almost like stamped metal, which felt really cool. And then it brings in these like isometric textures, kind of like we looked at, and you spoke to as well. This like building kind of architectural feel. And then also these 3D kind of build outs of different things. So if you scroll through these too, there's a few samples of those, and it's like design, build, launch. You can kind of just with a few basic geometric shapes start to indicate like motion and do things in a cool abstract way. So the color palette here just kind of mimics that really modern vibe, and it has so much energy. This persimmon color is just, it stands out so much, and it grabs your attention in a way that's really unexpected. I think everybody in this space usually just goes with something blue, and so it's kind of exciting.
Refreshing. Yeah.
It's a totally unseen thing.
Yeah. No, it's really cool. And we definitely, when we saw this color palette, it definitely jumped out. We had picked like a kind of a weird shade of pink that we had just blended on, but we kind of, the strategy was mostly sound as far as what we wanted. It was something that was bright, that kind of like had motion, had energy. It just wasn't a great, it had some weird things where it didn't quite fit in a lot of different applications. So this color works really well on light backgrounds, dark backgrounds. It just works so well. So this definitely jumped out at us. And some type options, I think. I'll kind of skip through. I know we've got a lot to cover.
Yeah.
11 minutes left. So yeah, just looking at some different overview, I think I kind of wanted to skip to And there's just a lot of build out. I'll kind of skip through this really quick, and you guys go back and pause this if you're interested. But just wanted to, like, what was impressive to me as a client was seeing this was just one concept. Like, this was just us giving, like, here's some mood boards, and then you know, putting together like a lot of different examples of what this is going to actually look like. And so I was like, our whole team could kind of get really excited about it because they could see, like, oh, it could be on all these different applications. Here's like how we show off different things. Here's you know, in a book. There's just so many different examples, which really helped bring the concept to life versus just like, here's like a shape for an icon and here's some type that shows up next to it. It kind of gave it a whole like feel for it. I think that was really exciting.
Definitely.
So cool.
Yeah, and then it completely went divergent from there. Here's a completely different thing that you could do that's still a totally valid approach. Growth architect, so this is building off of that second concept as well, and kind of walking through things that are a little bit more architectural. And so for this, I was thinking about transformation in this idea of almost more blueprinty, like you're starting to see some of the underlying things here. And so there's these two circles. It's similar in that you're showing like scale on the one hand, and also there's this kind of embedded arrow that's showing, you know, moving up towards the larger. And it just is this nice, strong abstract mark. And kind of has a nice little 3-piece system to it as well.
This was pretty cool. And this little design right here, sometimes like seeing the meaning behind the logo, it made us actually like the logo a lot more. Because first you're like, oh, okay, there's just like a couple lines and some circles. And then you see like how all the pieces fit together and what they're for. You're like, oh, that's our brand. Like it's saying kind of our brand mission subconsciously in the logo. So this was pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, I think, the first time we saw these like little accents, I think.
Yeah.
On the logo there, which are really cool. Yeah, there's that.
So then this was the typography that for this concept, this is taken from a typeface by like a kind of mid-century Art Deco to mid-century architect. And so this was what was seen on a lot of the skyscrapers that he was working on. Like, this is kind of the typeface that runs along those skyscraper faces. And so I think this really resonated with you to have this very architectural, historical kind of typeface.
Yeah, it just looked really timeless. I'm like a huge fan of mid-century architecture as well. So when we saw this, it was like, oh, I just like that. I didn't know why I liked it. And then Russell kind of explained like, oh, well, this is where it came from. This is what was used like on these different skyscrapers. And I was like, oh, okay, well, like that's why I like it, because it's like this very, it just looked very specific. And like most people who look at the logo will never know this, but I think it's also important. It's also really important for us as the team, especially as me as the founder, like that there's so much of my DNA that's like in this that makes it really special, I think, as well. Because you have to, at the end of the day, like you have to love your own brand. You have to love your own like vision, or else like why would you want to get up in the morning and go and work on something you're not super passionate about? So it's these little details that like came back. And I think, you know, as a teaser, like this ended up being, I think, the type we went with, right? Or maybe something very close to it. Just seeing it in this example. So, but yeah, we'll keep going. So this was the logo type there. Yeah, okay, and this was the same thing, kind of thinking through all these different backgrounds and different pieces.
Yeah. So there's a cool little icon system idea here, and then there was this kind of like weird blueprint grid on the next slide. It's kind of like it's not totally normal, like it's got certain long pieces, kind of makes it more of like an interesting pattern. These hand-drawn elements kind of worked in and how they work along with the different typography.
Yeah, that's cool.
And then these kind of blown out like arrows in the schematic view that we talked about. And
I think you made this, right? This was custom.
Yeah, everything in this deck from here forward is.
I just have to keep asking. I think Russell's told me this 3 times. And I'm like, just because like this would have been easy to go and like borrow to be like, hey, do you like this? If you like it, I'll go spend some time and make it. But Russell's like, why don't I make it and then we'll just see if you like it. Like it's kind of backwards, but it's really cool. Knowing this may or may not actually get used. So cool.
So colors here, again, kind of everything around the blueprint idea. GT Super, This typeface, I mean, and spoiler alert, it's kind of where we landed.
Yeah.
But for headlines, it's so unexpected and it's so beautiful. It's just got like the sharpest serifs that you've ever seen, and it's just I don't know, it's something about it is it's just really I think the editorial nature of it pairing with the kind of editor's notes just made that feel like a high-end magazine rather than something else. Like everyone uses geometric sans serif headlines, and this doesn't. So I think that's nice.
And pro tip, if you're a client watching this on the client side, like when a designer gets super excited about a specific font, which is like, oh, designers are always excited about fonts, but they stare at fonts all day. And Russell, like every time we talked about this, as you can just tell, like there was like all this extra love and like passion for this. When I was like, this is real. I of course loved it. Like I loved how it looked, but seeing like how he was seeing it, I was like, oh, okay, this is, I need to pay attention to this. That's very helpful. So we had like for the copy here, and then some other build outs. Again, just seeing all the applications, I think, coming up here. So this is website Mockup. And this was cool. And I think you just came up with some of this copy as well, which obviously copy and brand go so, is tied together so well. But we ended up using some of this copy in the final website because it was so good. Yeah.
No lorem ipsum. No filler copy.
That's good for the designers watching. Don't use lorem ipsum. That's a good pro tip right there.
It just doesn't help communicate, so don't put it. Try to write something.
Yeah, that's good. But yeah, just seeing all these different things. And I just love like the details that this is now like a grayscale version. Like you didn't even just use the one that was the same that we saw earlier. It's to show variety. That's cool, yeah. I think because it's helpful to see like from the logo at the beginning to now seeing on it here, like you probably have like a different point of view of it or like a different opinion of it now that you kind of see it in the real world. Because that's how it is going to be experienced, is in the real world. No one's going to be looking at it on this like beautiful white screen with just the logo in the middle. Like it's always going to be on something, Yeah.
Context is everything for it. For sure.
Cool. Yeah, very cool. Yeah, so many different stems. So I think you just compared all these, which we'll just summarize and then move on. But kind of just seeing everything kind of side by side was very helpful. Cool. So we're like, I think where we landed with this is we spent another probably like a week or so going through writing up a whole bunch of notes for you and just saying like, I think we liked, this element, or like the typography here. And then I think you went off and did like a revision 2, which ended up being very similar to revision 3. So we're going to kind of skip ahead to the third revision here. But this was kind of taking like, I guess, all the comments. And again, in our mind, like these things are so different. Like when we picked something, like one looks so classic, it's a little more mature, like the blues and the more like if we were going after like a law firm or architectural firm, it has this like different, more mature look to it. The other one's very like tech startup, like new, innovative. So we kept combining like different things from different of those two concepts. So this is where we're kind of like, cool, like we're really excited to see what you come back with, because I have no idea what this is going to look like. I can't, without being like a Frankenstein logo where it's just like everything stuck together. So
yeah, things combine pretty well. And I'll tell you too, like if it's like, that's not going to look good together. So
yeah, I think you did say that at some point. And I think you even showed it right here.
Yeah.
At one point I was like, it just looked a little thin. So I was like, can you fill it in? And this was sort of Russell being like, yep, I'll fill it in and I'll show it to you. And you can see how it doesn't work. Just like, cool. Okay.
Yeah. So then we landed on, we kind of brought in the word mark from the second to the first with the colors of the first. And you can kind of see how all of that sits together. And it worked out really nicely if you keep going here. Yeah. So there's the final.
Yeah, and this would end up being what we went with. Really liked it.
And then we used that first color palette, some slight tweaks to it, but kind of carried that through to keep that more energetic look. to the classic other pieces.
Yeah. Yeah, very cool. And it like the other thing people said is it almost looks like a flame as well, which is just like igniting something or starting something. That was kind of the other once they again just adding the color. Now I got that feedback. And one thing as well, like as you're getting these things, I spent a lot of time. We showed our team. I showed other people I trusted, other people who like different people that worked with us, like maybe someone who's another vendor or partner. I had somebody who's like been long-term clients from us and just be like, hey, does this feel like us? Like, got a lot of different opinions of this so that, the one thing I see a lot of people doing, and this happens with software and I guess with brands, people keep like everything so tight and they're like, we're not going to do anything. We're going to do this massive launch and like, just going to wow the world with this awesome brand. And like, that never really works. Like getting everybody's buy-in, getting some thoughts and opinions, it really helps make it so much more kind of vetted, and it just gets you a lot more you get a lot more confident just getting a lot of people's opinion of it way before you launch it into the world. So
yeah. But on that same note, I think that is really good if you're people who know what you want, because I have seen people say like, well, let me gather a million different opinions and I don't know what I want, so I'm having a hard time listening to all these outside voices. I think I agree. Like, there's no point in doing this grand reveal. Like, talk to people, shop around with people, but also know what you want too, so that you're not just like going with the wind.
Absolutely, yeah. So this was I'll kind of skip some of this, just seeing lots of different layouts. This is the GT Super we went with, which we really liked, and I think we ended up swapping this copy font at the end, but it's very similar. Mm-hmm. And then we started seeing these little like icons. This is the first time I think we saw the icon that you had designed for this. And it was these little hand-drawn, like very custom. Oh yeah, here it is. Like the design, build, scale, design, build, launch. I mean, and that was like the first time we saw those like very custom icons. And I think you just drew these, right? Like you just sketch these out on iPad or whatever.
Yeah.
That's really cool. So they're very original. And in a world, especially in development and when you're doing UI design, like there's just libraries with millions of like icons in there. So to have something that's super custom like this, it was very special to us because we deal with icons every single day. And this was something that was just really original, which was exciting. So cool. And then we had those, the ISO textures again. And this was cool. I think you built all these out. And I think this gave us like a library of stuff to pull from. We're even using one for this stream, like as the background. But that was I think way back in the original questionnaire, one of you said, I think you had a question like, what are things that you're needing or lacking in your brand that you need more of? And we had put in there that we wanted just more imagery, more textures, more background textures. And so we ended up with this whole kind of library of stuff that we could use then. See all these different kind of drawings. So we could actually take those things from this page, sort of apply them, to this. So it feels very like we were reading through it and just like underlining stuff, or we were circling stuff, and which is actually a lot of how like our stuff looks. Like I probably drive my team crazy with like all my arrows and crossing stuff out and hey, don't do this. And so like this was very us, which was really cool.
Yeah.
If you were to work with us, like you would probably see something like this where we're like actually hiding. So it was very authentic, I think. Cool. And there you brought in the kind of exploded blueprint thing, but now with the new colors.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, yeah.
And this was just kind of putting everything together in the final. This is kind of where we landed. Mm-hmm. Accents and cool. And that's our dog, by the way. Yeah, this is the whole thing, just kind of seeing everything built. This is where we landed. Super exciting. And this like these little type things, like I think we're still adding this to some swag right now, but this busy building better businesses, like when my wife read that, she was like, "Oh, that's exactly like what you do every single day." Like that's totally you. So these little copy things got pulled all the way through to the end. So
that makes me happy too.
Yeah. Cool. And I think like that was honestly everything. I think you also gave us like a very like detailed thing. I'll just mention this from the development side. Like this was super helpful because we got to as developers, we wanted to get all the type and the line height and everything. And this was all sort of the code that's needed to style all these different things. So we knew every time we use a link, it's going to look like this headline, different buttons, what it looks like on dark, how to use those accents. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Yeah. And then on dark. So yeah, just a really cool looking brand. We're super excited. I'm really like, we're in the process of working on our website to actually get it live. When you're building websites for other people, the last website you always work on is your own. And so we should have that live in the next couple of days here. I'm super excited to get it out in the world. So yeah. Any closing thoughts that you have from the process? I think, what was this, about 6-7 weeks all in all?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's kind of it's usually from like start to that first very big concept reveal document. It's usually like 4 weeks. And I think from there, it's just kind of like a lot of iteration. Like it's kind of this big reveal and then it's working really close and having lots of calls and going back and forth and like, let's talk about feedback. Let's talk about what we want to see in the next round and getting that right. So that sounds about right. Yeah, I mean, this was a great project. This is actually, to me, one of like personally my favorite logos I've worked on. I love this icon, so I'm so glad that it is where it is. And I love like even just looking at these background textures and all of that. Like it's come together really well. So I'm really, really happy too. Which is not always the end goal. Like the end goal is it needs to be the brand you guys are excited about, but it's a pretty big plus that I love it too.
Yeah. Absolutely. And yeah, we love it. And I think that's the thing is at the end of the day, like it's a little daunting to say, okay, we're going to put, some time, some money aside. We're going to actually invest really. And that's what it is. You're investing in your own company. It's kind of the last thing you think to do. But once you do it and you kind of get to the other side, it actually makes everything so much easier. When we're putting a presentation together, we're writing an email, putting a landing page together. Like I just pull from these assets now and I can put these pages together. Our team can just pull stuff and it always looks really creative. It looks really fun. And everything just looks unified for the first time, which I feel like, because we would kind of get frustrated with the brand. So we would like iterate on it for a certain presentation, maybe tweaks, add something new, and then we would do something over here. And so you ended up with this like weird kind of, bunch of stuff. Now everything's kind of unified. And not only that, there's like a ton of intentionality into every detail, which is really fun. So every time we bring in an accent, every time we bring in a certain font or whatever, it's like, this was here for a reason. We spent a lot of time. We don't you sort of invest all that time in one block of time, and then you don't have to ever do that sort of creative thinking in the future. You can kind of just focus on getting stuff out the door, selling, moving your business forward. Because you kind of have made those decisions already at one point. So
yeah, that's awesome.
Awesome. Well, cool. Well, thanks guys for watching. Thanks Russell for taking time. I know this is, I don't think I've ever seen like a designer and a client get on a live stream together and like talk through a process like this. But as you can see, like where we landed with the brand with those kind of blueprints and exploded things, we can kind of see what's going on. Like this was very like in line with our own brand. So we thought it was great, but really appreciate your time, Russell, and chatting with us, but of course, putting this brand together. This is something we're going to use probably for the next 5 to 10 years.
That's awesome. Glad to hear it. Yeah, it's always fun to talk process. So this was great.
Awesome. Well, guys, I'll link as well if you're interested in following Russell or checking out his website. There'll be a link in the description. And yeah, we'd love to chat with you. We'll be posting this later with some links to our website and stuff. And let us know what you think of the brand. Like we obviously love it, but we'd love to see what everybody else thinks about it and go from there. But awesome, guys. Thanks for watching. We'll end.
Thanks, everybody.